may need an extension to their visa. The Social Democrats have promised to build 100,000 social and affordable homes over the next 5 years if elected. The party launched its manifesto this morning, also promising a nationwide rent freeze, legislation to stop land hoarding and to eradicate homelessness over the life of the next government. Co-leader Roisin Shorthall says addressing the costs of housing is a priority.
The lack of affordability in housing, whether for mortgages, for people who want to purchase, or renters, it's the single biggest driver in our high cost of living. It's also the single biggest driver in wage demands.
Lastly, the National Lottery has announced that the first lotto jackpot of 2020 has been
Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Right, you're very welcome. Let's talk rugby. I'm delighted to say we've got Liam Toland with us. Liam, good afternoon to you. How are you doing?
Good as gold, Ger.
Are you still as excited about the Six Nations as traditionally? Is this does this got your dander up, your appetite whet?
Well, I think the beauty of world rugby is that 1 minute you're playing your domestic league, then Europe comes along, then the autumn series, which is in November, which is an oxymoron of sorts, and then before you know it, you're back into the Six Nations. So it's a brilliant part of our rugby calendar that we have this flavour constantly turning around. So yeah, I'm really excited, really interested. There are certain changes we'll notice, obviously, in selection and the coaching structure, but it gives us all a fresh start again. So I'm really excited for it, Jem.
It is actually also a brilliant tournament. I know there's definitely, you can wax and wane on how so much importance goes into the fact that it's such a small portion of the world, but actually it's ours, and it's got such great tradition, and the rivalries are real, and the friendships that get made. It's actually a real thing, and it's a very nice thing that we shouldn't take for granted.
Absolutely, and I had the pleasure of company for about 20 minutes in Japan, and of course the World Cup it's like a meeting of the Hong Kong Sevens with the Six Nations, and there's nothing quite like the Six Nations. It's so unique as a tournament. You meet people, for instance, tomorrow it is the 30th anniversary of the 1990 Irish Schools team. I was lucky enough to be on it, and we were the first Irish Schools team to win the Triple Crown by beating England and Oxford 30 years ago. So we're all meeting for the very first time in 30 years. And stuff like that is happening in this tournament all the time. So it's a very exciting, two of the big players you'll know is David Humphreys and Paul Wallace. But there's been some other great stars in the side as well. So that type of stuff is happening under the kind of radar of the Six Nations. But it's a serious tournament. It's one that Ireland has always taken seriously. And we've had such a pleasure in the last decade. We've been competing pretty much through the decade as well, which is not the way it was back in the 90s and beyond.
Yeah, we shouldn't take that for granted. That was definitely something that did happen. In fairness, Eddie O'Sullivan kind of had us at that level, so it wasn't like Joe Schmidt came along and waved a magic wand and suddenly we were competitive. It has really been, maybe did the end of the Gatland era also see us start to get competitive?
It was huge. Like, I remember I was in the Irish squad back in the 90s, and unfortunately never got an opportunity to taste the Six Nations or the Five Nations for real. But I always, even at that, I was only like 20 when I was in the squad, and I got a sense that it's not quite, even though I had no benchmark to what was happening, but the talk in the press was, I think Ireland had a great opportunity, a great chance, but it wasn't built on anything. There was no foundation for it being a great chance. And you remember the try Mick Galway scored for Ireland in the corner in Lansdowne Road against England. I was involved in the squad at that stage. And I'm thinking, how are we beating this English side? Because we've like the previous week, we're all playing for our clubs and stuff. Whereas now, the players now, that's irrelevant. The players now are genuine stars before they get to play for Ireland. And you think of Caelan Doris as an example. Like he's arrived in, but he's a body of work behind him that he can point to and say, listen, I've done this, and this. Yes, tomorrow is a unique occasion for him, and there's going to be questions asked of him that he hopefully will answer. But he won't know until he plays in it. But he has a body of work, as do the rest of Irish rugby, have a genuine foundation for every Six Nations they go into. And that's a testament, you're right. It goes all the way back to Gatland. Then Eddie O'Sullivan deserves huge credit for what he did. He dragged the professional game into a professional era, really, because there was still an awful lot of residue of players who came from the amateur pass, and he was part of that. And not just that, he did some really good work around maybe the Alec Adoos, although were successful in their own right. had no idea professional sport at all. And you think back to when Connacht was potentially being rubbered out of Irish rugby. You think, well, the people driving that at the time were the Alakadoos essentially, and the players and Eddie O'Sullivan dragged it on. So yeah, we're very fortunate, and I think we should always keep an eye on the past, that this isn't an automatic thing. We have to work very hard to keep the machine going.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to come back to Caelan Doris and the makeup of the back row in a couple of minutes, but I want to play you this clip because on Wednesday night rugby, Brian O'Driscoll was saying this Ireland pack lacks a bit of dog. This ended up being put to Rob Herring. He was asked about it in a press conference. He says that it's something that the pack have actually addressed, and so, don't worry, we've got this. He says he thinks they won't be bullied by anybody in the Six Nations. But on this morning's OTB AM, Alan Quinlan said he wasn't so sure. Have a look at this.
There was the interesting stuff about all the comments about the dog in the pack, or the lack of a dog in the pack this week. Brian O'Driscoll was suggesting that, that Dennis Leamy, Peter O'Mahony, obviously, type character, that isn't really there. Rob Herring has responded to it, saying that he'd disagree with that because I don't really know what it's based on. I don't know what he's seen in our club games that makes him think that. Andy has picked a squad that can deliver on that aspect, and obviously we have to go out there and do it still. But Brian O'Driscoll's right, there isn't.
He is right. England bullied us last year. Wales bullied us. And I think at times the discipline was so good under Joe, and it was one of the really positive points of, and even referees loved the referee in Ireland because they were so disciplined, and we've spoken before about, Joe would take the players back and look at the videos and say, well, look, that should have been a penalty, even ones that weren't given against Ireland. And it made Ireland a very careful side and a very disciplined side, which is very, very important because, in tight games, you give away silly penalties, you lose the match. But I just think sometimes, and going on what Dricka was saying, sometimes we get bullied by teams, and we get teams being offside against us and being cynical against us, and we allow it to happen. We're a little bit soft is probably the wrong word, but we accept it a little bit too much.
Yeah, soft is the wrong word, but maybe it's the right word. That was kind of what I was picking up there.
Well, I think to start off with, we need a number of definitions. What is the definition of dog? Because that's something that maybe Alan is referring to back in the 80s and 90s. Certainly in the professional era, when we were fortunate enough to go playing rugby out in France in the early 90s, it was violent. It was an absolute violence that you got. Eye gouging was a gentle entry into the violence of it. When you played in England or you played in Wales, it was in its own version thereof. But England bullied us, not because we hadn't dog. England bullied us because they have athletes that have the ability to dominate their game plan over ours. So are we supposed to react to that onslaught by poking guys in the eye, by hitting them cheap shots, or by what? So I'm a bit confused about this concept of dog. Now, if you were to say, can we meet up the Irish front pack? Well, Jean Klein is an example of somebody who could certainly do that. And what he does, having watched him loads of times last season, is when there's a loose guy on the side of a ruck, he will hammer him into the ruck. When there's a line-out maul to be defended, he will put his body into the heart of that and just be the most awkward he could possibly. That's a style he brings, it's an attitude he brings clearly. And there's, on the Irish side picked tomorrow, there's lots of players who don't, that's not their natural game. But we don't need to beat top sides by introducing this mythical kind of cloak and dagger stuff. I don't think we need to do that. Leinster have won European Cups and they have never been that type of team. If you play at the very, very highest level that these guys are playing tomorrow, I think if you want to dominate your game plan over others, you have to have a game plan that can do that.
You mentioned Leinster, but just on a counterpoint on that, they had Nathan Hines and they had Brad Thorne, and the most recent one they probably didn't have somebody quite like that in the second row. Maybe Fardy's a bit like that, but not quite. Maybe Fardy is a bit like that, and that was his role in that, to kind of stop it being just a Devon Toner and James Ryan team where they're going to do the skills and the basics of the game really well. But there was a bit of dog in that Leinster team, and that's what they needed to get them over the line.
Yeah, but maybe we could change the word to impose. Brad Thorne was a player who imposed himself physically on the opposition. That's different. So if that's fine, I think we need players to impose. But that goes back to game plan as well. Have we got players who are capable of imposing the Irish game plan? We discovered that the Irish game plan in the last 18 months, 2 years, or maybe beyond, even when we won the Grand Slam, was about one-out runners having a ruthless efficiency in ruck breakdown. When the opposition figured that out, all of a sudden we began to crumble, as we've seen. So how are we imposing? So the first thing should be, well, what game plan is our new Irish management going to bring in that can impose our unique skill set into the opposition? And when you play against England, whether you like it or not, they are always, for 100 years, they've been bigger, more physical than us. So it's about us imposing it. I'm not so sure we need to get dirty with them. I'm not so sure we need to do that. But there are opportunities. And like you saw what Peter Mahoney did when England came to Ireland a couple of seasons ago, he stole a line-out ball. That's more of a dog than anything. That is a multiple positive impact to Ireland. He didn't have to hit anyone to do that. You win the line-out ball, and that's a huge psychological boost.
Yeah, I would say Brian O'Driscoll did not mean we need to cheat. We're like, not this isn't kneel back, or this isn't like burrowing in the scrum. It's like, it is that kind of bloody-mindedness that you were talking about Klein bringing. It is that I'm on the ball and I'm not going to get driven off you. But But
you're asking me, Ger, to finish the kind of essay is that when I wrote about John Klein being selected over Devon Toner, I think Toner should have gone to the World Cup, but I was trying to reverse engineer why Klein was picked. I think because Joe Smith decided long earlier that Toner was no longer up to it. So I think, and then he picked Klein. But I was trying to reverse engineer it. And one of the key reasons why I felt he was being picked is for that very reason, that when you play a midweek team, he's the type of leader who doesn't have to talk. He just goes on smashing fellas. And there's a value to that, absolutely. Absolutely, there's a value to it. But the higher up you go, obviously the higher up you go, then you need athletes who can actually impose their game plan. And it becomes less important, right? Now, South Africa have won the World Cup, but they have a very direct style of game, okay? And they've monsters directing that style. So that's their natural style. So they're going to have second rows and back rows who play that type of game. I don't think we'll ever be that type of team that will have a front five that can, and you look at, say, New Zealand, like there's a great story Paul McCarthy told me when he was playing for Ireland against Australia back in the early 90s in Lansdowne Road. So he was playing that stage, I think, Dolphin or Cork Con, and he went down to the first scrum and it was all hell broke loose. The second scrum he went down and I think he headbutted Phil Kearns or something like that, whoever the hooker or the lily crap or whatever the prop was. And the Australian front row just looked at each other and completely ignored that he was being hit and just went back playing rugby. And Paul McCarthy tells me, he struggled with the scrum and then he tried to start a fight and they wouldn't even fight him. In other words, they had no interest in that stuff. They just wanted to play rugby. And they would impose themselves in doing so. But we have always had this tradition of it's an important ingredient. I'm not so sure how important it is now. Yes, having someone like Klein playing is a benefit, but you wouldn't drop Toner or you wouldn't drop Henderson or you wouldn't drop Ryan for that outcome. You'd promote the other aspects of the game as higher up.
Yeah, I totally get that, right? So let's go back, though, to the England game last year when their athletes imposed themselves and their game plan on us and we had no answer to that. What can we do? So is it purely about mindset to recuperate when you do get smashed in that over-the-top line-out ball and they suddenly have Tuilagi running down a channel and smash? And from that point forward, that game looked over a minute and a half into it because England had imposed themselves. What can we do to stop that happening when we are a smaller, lighter, more nimble team?
Well, I think there's two answers to that. The first is if you had a bench that can have an impact, a physical impact, of course, that's helpful, right? We don't tend to have that type of bench. Now, tomorrow we kind of do, but, typically we don't. But if you see Peter Mahoney coming on tomorrow, I don't think he'd be coming on to do what you're talking about. He'd be coming on to steal the ball, steal the breakdown, to change the flow of the game. But I would bring it to what Scotland did in Twickenham. Was that last season? It was, wasn't it? They were absolutely hammered out the gate and they changed their game plan for the second 40. And all of a sudden they started playing a game. Now it helped that England mentally dipped a bit, but they started playing a game that allowed Scotland to accentuate their advantages and to limit the English advantages. You have to switch what you're doing. But England showed the last few times they played that our box kicking game, they had a system to render the advantages right down. So we didn't get the same advantages. And there was a couple of things as well, like that game in England in the warm-up game. There was a scrum, I can't remember, it was like 17 minutes into the game or 27 minutes, and Ireland were only a few points behind, and England scored off the base of the scrum.
Yeah.
There's moments that they got the edge on us, where we would, in the previous seasons, have got the edge on them, and that happens. But when it comes down to a power game, England, if you let them, if the recycle is going to be less than 3 seconds, no amount of eye gouging is going to stop their midfield from doing damage. Like.
Tell us about what you expect from this Irish back row. So Caelan Doris came in. I think everybody's very excited about what his career might be. We've no idea on what his ceiling could be, but certainly it's very high. The whispers from the Leinster hierarchy over the last couple of years have been waiting to see this guy. He's absolutely amazing. So he has lived up and has got better with every game and got better as all the responsibilities come in. Van der Fleer seems like the one number 7 we have, and we're kind of a little bit exposed if he gets injured. And then CJ Stander, is there a potential for him to be reborn at 6? How does this trio work together?
Well, I've always been an advocate of a footballing number 8. I think Doris is a footballing number 8 in the sense that he has the ability to manage the base of the scrum at scrum time, but he understands space. He understands utilising space and 3v2s, and just this, we don't give enough credit to number 8s. Foley could do it easy. Now, he wasn't the quickest over the ground, but you go back to other number 8s who've played for Ireland, there's always been a strong ingredient, a footballing number 8, and Doris is one. I think what Doris does as well is, I referred to him today and compared him to Kieran Reid. Like when New Zealand had a challenge against the Lions in the first test, they really struggled to beat the fast on-rushing Lions defence, the classic Sean Edwards type of style of defence. So they had to be creative and say, well, where are we going to create the space? If they're putting 4-13 in the line, where are we going to get the space? So they used Kieran Reid much further out, much wider out. They set up a wider pod way out in 2/3 across the pitch, and they created a relatively big blind side and a huge open side, and then they had 2 pivots. They had Mackenzie the full-back and whoever's playing at 10 going either side. So what New Zealand wanted to do with Kieran Reid is they wanted to ultimately create a position where the Lions or any Northern Hemisphere team had only 3 or 4 defenders on one side and couldn't rush up because they didn't have the numbers. And once they couldn't rush up, they knew that the All Black skill set would get past it. Someone like a Doris at number 8 can give you those types of outcomes if he's more comfortable out in there. And I didn't have enough space to articulate in today's paper, but that's where I was heading with in my thoughts. That a guy like Doris can completely allow the coaching structure to have a tactical game plan when they're faced with challenges, because he has the skills to play across the full 70 metres. And we know that because Leinster expect him to have those skills. Therefore, he already has them as a young guy. And I think he can grow into that role where a game plan can be built around him subtly like that. Then when you move Standard to blindside, all of a sudden you can say, listen, we're taking the footballing decision-making process off you, and we're giving you a specific role. Now, I have always advocated, I would love to see him, because he's quick, attacking in a different point than he has been currently. He gets killed, like, his stats, how he's not, So if we can get him, Adam Hastings is playing at 10, if we can set up structures where he's running at Hastings, and he doesn't have maybe a footballing decision to make, you're putting him into place to do damage, I think that would be hugely beneficial. And someone like Josh Van der Fleer is a super open side. The challenge he has, you've mentioned, against the likes of England, when we play against the likes of England and we're going back more than we're going forward, that's going to be a challenge for him. The balance is lovely, it really, really is, and I'm really interested to see how Standard revels. It's a different number, and it gives him, but the number is almost irrelevant. It's the job he's been given and what has been taken off him is very, very interesting. And you see, when someone like Heaslip and Stander shared the back row, it's very interesting to see how that impacted Heaslip and on and sort. So I think with Doris, I'm not over-egging him, but I think he is your classic footballing number 8 who has the brains and the athleticism, maybe not quite yet, but he's going to athletically get there, but he can play across the 70 metres and he's very exciting as a result.
Yeah, well that like makes it sound like he's a Jenga piece that kind of the whole thing can shift around, which is unbelievably exciting for somebody who's so young and has that ahead of him. And we know that Mac Deegan is going to be capable of doing a similar job, so it's not like if he gets injured or, we're managing his minutes or whatever, then suddenly the whole team is going to fall apart. There is this great situation we have now where we're going to be able to do this for a long period of time.
Yeah, and again, see, you go back to the point, what do you do when you're playing against, what do New Zealand do or Australia do? They invent, it might take them a little bit of time, but they invent a way around beating what's been presented to them. And Ireland have for 3 or 4 seasons not changed really anything that they've been doing. And all that time, the opposition have been learning about us and have been able to impose their game and nullify ours. So I think having players, and that's why, again, I asked today, Do you reverse engineer this? In other words, do you look at the players you have and you pick them and you accept that there's going to be errors and faults in it? But do you look down the tracks and go, well, what can be gained by having players like this who can tweak and have the ability to understand and be able to play a different game when asked of them? And like Jack Conan, the Leinster number 8, I've always felt he was a creative player, but he was never first choice for Ireland.
Yeah.
He just couldn't get in because he wasn't quite the same as what the Irish back row they were starting. He wasn't. But we need to forgive them of certain things. And Tadhg Beirne's another example. There's lots of things he doesn't do, but there's lots of things he does do as well, you know?
Yeah, Bill Belichick always insists on not asking what players can't do, what can they do, and then you build on that. And you worry about all the rest of the stuff in your game plan, but you build on what the talent you have, as opposed to when you're evaluating players, you don't go, oh, he can't do this, and he can't do this, and he can't do this, so he's useless to me. It's like, what can he actually do? We're out of time here, Liam, but a lot of people's assessment of this week has been that Scotland are a bit of a rabble. They're coming off a disastrous World Cup. It looks like their coach could be dead man walking. Their best player is at home on the couch drinking wine. What's your take on how these two teams mesh up, and ultimately what's your prediction?
Well, I think Ireland are going to be strong favourites. That's no doubt, for a variety of reasons. But at the same time, I'm a little bit, and I'm not doing the old, I think we'll only win by a score. I'm actually genuinely concerned that the Irish public are accepting this as a flat bank, easy win. Nothing is easy in the Six Nations, and I don't think that we should accept it. That said, I would be disappointed if we don't win and win reasonably well. But more importantly, again, we've talked about Doris. First cap might be a little bit ambitious, but can we see him popping up into places along the 70 metres? Like, you see what Munster and Leinster in Thomond Park a few weeks ago in the rain, how Munster approached the first half and how Leinster did. Like, the skill set differential. It doesn't mean the players aren't skilled. It just means Leinster are doing it every week. And I'd love to see Doris being a creative part, that he does something that's in 3 phases time, a winger scoring a try, and that for me would be huge. I'd come away from the game going, wow, we're already moving towards what these players can do in a green jersey beyond what they've been doing in the provincial jerseys.
All right, Liam, great stuff. That was really fascinating. Thanks a million for joining us.
Okay, take care.
Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.